What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. You are tuned in to the Hot List. I'm your host, Matt Johnson, with Keller Williams Realty. And in the Hot List, we talk real estate topics. We talk about real estate questions, concerns, improvements, and just all around general questions. This is where I answer a question of the day that is submitted by a listener of the podcast. To find out how you get your question answered on air, all you got to do is just hang with me until the end, and I would be happy to answer that. First and foremost, just thank you everybody for tuning in, joining. Whether you are catching this live on Facebook, you're watching this on YouTube, or your podcast player of choice, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time and hanging out with me while we are doing this. And I just greatly appreciate you taking the time. As you guys know, this podcast I do live on Facebook at 12 o'clock Central Standard Time. From there, it is put out to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as Spotify. So whatever your podcast player of choice is, you can just subscribe to the podcast. New episodes will automatically be downloaded to your podcast player of choice. So as these come out and available, you get a notification and can get on top of listening to those. So as we are getting into the question of the day, if you have a real estate question, topic, maybe even a concern, you're not sure where to start, I would be happy to be the real estate resource that you reach out to, you start with, and we can go from there. If you have a question, the chance that somebody else has that same question is very high. Maybe they don't have somebody that they can ask, don't know where to start, and you can obviously, I would be happy for you to start with me. If you have a question of the day that you would like answered, all you have to do is shoot it to me here on Facebook, YouTube, or leave it in the comments on the podcast player that you're listening to. That, no matter how you send it to me, it's going to get to me. I would be happy to not only answer that question for you, but use that for content for future videos similar to the one that we are going to do today. Because again, if you have a question or concern about real estate, the chance somebody else has that is very strong, and this helps get that out there and available. So stop me if you've never heard this. You've created this space, like a playroom, play area for your children to confine, not necessarily confine them, but confine their mess. And then it seems to end up everywhere in the house. You ever have that happen before? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because whether you're starting out with a nursery for your first child, your most recent child, or a bedroom, maybe you're upgrading to a specific playroom. I can assure you one thing: over the last 2 years, with the pandemic that has been going on, this has been almost as important, if not more important, than having a home office and working from home. Because creating that unique space for children has been, in my experience, or is typically larger than what you expected to get yourself into, especially if it needs to hold up to your kids and stand the test of time. And we all know that the wants and needs of your children, maybe your grandchildren, are going to change over time as they age. So keep this in mind when you are designing that perfect room space. Otherwise, remember that mess that we talked about that it just kind of seemed to be everywhere except for the room that you designated. That's because they may have outgrown, or maybe that has been outdated and is now an unwanted space. So what happens then? So the question of the day we're going to get into, is there a way to create a flexible space for kids? Well, the simple answer is there absolutely is. Whether you have a spare bedroom, a basement, a garage, maybe attic. I mean, any of these can be converted into spaces, but then you go back to what happens once they outgrow that, it becomes outdated and unwanted. These are things that you have to take into consideration with children's needs as they and wants as they change over time. You have to come up with some flexible design options, and this is going to be easier to adapt and shift as your child's interests shift as well. Now, don't get me wrong, no matter what space that you create, having gone through this with 3 kids myself, you're still going to have to make changes periodically, maybe without going full blown remodel, every other year. So, what we're going to talk about today are 3 ways to create flexible spaces for your kids. Number one, I'm a firm believer in this. Start simple. You know, in the army, it was the KISS method. KISS method. Keep it keep it simple, stupid. And I absolutely believe that because more often than not, at least, when we did this for the first time, we'd never done it before and weren't familiar with it. So I would recommend taking a minimalist approach if this is going to be your first try, your first go around. Need to consider what are the absolute essentials that you're going to need. Are there ways to think and create, beyond the age and interests that your child is now? Maybe you can add some color to the room. Maybe not like a bright pink or neon green that's a true personalized color, but maybe a light or neutral color that they're not going to get bored of over time. And that would be one less thing that you would have to do when the time comes to change their interest. The other option that you can do is invest in furniture. Key furniture items can be utilized again and again and repurposed for whatever. Uh, this reduces having to buy pieces that you're just going to use for a short amount of time. Like uh, when we had our third child, the one thing that we both wanted more than anything was a glider, and we had a glider in his bedroom nursery, and that was great for about a year, and then it became obsolete because we no longer needed it, and then at that point was just taking up space. You could also use colored rugs. So if you have hardwood floors, laminate floors, you can use different color rugs or theme rugs or other removable items. And this is going to make it easier for those quick changes instead of having to, change the carpet in the entire room. If something happens to that colored rug, something spilled or stained on it, it's easier to replace that rug than it is to replace the entire carpet in that room. Keep in mind that your goal here is to create a simple space. This simple space needs to have a lot of potential, and as your child's interests change, by keeping it and starting it simple, you're going to have a base to start with and reference and move back to. So that's really what your ultimate goal with this room is going to be. Number two, you want to customize the little things. So now that you've got your or the base design of the room, now is the time to start making some customization. Now, I'm not talking over the top customization. I'm talking small customization, small custom items that are in line with your children's interests. This is kind of where you can allow your creativity to flow a little bit during this stage. For example, lamps, posters, other decorative items. All this will go a long way with customizing whatever the room is, because lamps and posters especially are going to be able to change. Maybe, as a kid you want a cute little lamp, and then as they grow older, maybe it's a Toy Story lamp, or a Thomas the Train lamp, or whatever the case may be. Until they grow up, lamps are easy to change. Those are pretty cheap. Plus, you can resell those pretty quickly and easily on top of it. Posters. Posters were huge with my older two kids when they were teenagers. They they had posters of dreams, of goals, of heroes, of people they idolized. And my older son had blacklight posters and blacklights, which are very cool, and that those were popular when I was growing up, but I didn't realize they were still going to be popular when he was growing up as well. Or I would have hung on to all of mine and saved us some money. But this is still, all these are still relatively easy to remove and replace once your child loses interest in that and moves on to the next thing. One recommendation that I would give here, having personally done this, is go as far to paint furniture like desks or dressers. Seems silly, but stick with me here. I'm talking, like cheap, cheap dressers that you find at garage sale or Walmart. I'm not talking, top of the line dresser or bedroom sets. You want to choose something that isn't going to be a big deal if it's painted. Like I said, we did this with my daughter and she absolutely loved it. When we first started, we had just an old dresser that we picked up at a garage sale, and we painted it. Took some primer to it, primed it, and painted it white. And she loved this thing for years. She drew on it, she wrote on it, she colored on it, she painted on it. And when she was ready, or when her interest changed and she felt like she was going to start over, we just painted it again. We painted it white, we painted it black, we painted it pink, we painted it teal, over and over again. All we had to do was paint, and she had a blank canvas to start whatever she wanted to. Again, if this isn't an option or not something that you're comfortable with, by all means, just skip it. I'm just saying, by painting items like your dresser, desk, maybe nightstand, this is going to tie into the theme of the room and is going to better match the interest that your child has. Just doing this step alone can make a huge difference in the way that the room and the space looks and feels. And finally, number three on the list, designing with your kids. Now, this is a step that I absolutely recommend. I kind of went into that a little bit in step number two with my daughter's dresser. Uh, as our children grow, their interests are going to change. How often did our interests change while while we were growing up. It's their space. Make the changes that align with their interests. And just quick side note, disclaimer here, so nobody sues me. This doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy everything that your child wants. Every little thing that interests them right now, you have to go out and buy and spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying use these talks and these times with your children to gauge their satisfaction with the room as it sits right now. What sort of changes do they want? Is there any furniture or decorations that they're outgrowing? Sit down and talk with them. Find out. If the time that you spend doing this right now with them is the chance that they're going to keep whatever that is and whatever that mess is in that space that you've created with them, not in your living room, not down the hallway, not in the kitchen, and hopefully not in the bathroom. If you're not sure where to start or need some ideas, there are so many resources available right now. The best place to start is really going to be social media. Facebook has a number of groups and pages for not just for kids, but for decorating, for painting, for DIY projects. Pinterest is another great one as well. You can find a page or save a pin that jumps out at you and go back to it every time. One of the things that excuse me, one of the things that we did was YouTube. We looked for a lot of DIY ideas and projects on on YouTube, or that could be a good way for you to start, or at least give you something to talk about or include your kids in. I really hope this gives everybody a starting point. I know that uh, for us, three kids in, uh, thankfully only one left at home. We learned a lot from this. So when creating a flexible space for your children, especially right now over the last 2 years, we learned this is so important, almost as important as a home office or office space while you are working from home. It's their equivalent. So you want to start simple if you've never done it before. Use a minimalist approach. Find out what the absolute essentials are, what type of furniture or decorations that they're interested in right now. Excuse me. And your goal is to create a simple space with a ton of potential that you can use as a base and a reference point to go back to, so you don't have to do a full blown remodel every other year. Number two was customize little things. So once you've got some of the furniture, the paint down, maybe some rugs. Now is when you can do a little bit of customization with lamps, with posters, maybe even paint furniture like dressers, desks, nightstands, tables, whatever the case may be. Paint it. Make sure it's something cheap that you can paint multiple times. Like I mentioned with my daughter's dresser, we painted that thing, oh shit, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 times. Um, I mean, yeah, we spent a lot of time painting on that. But paint is relatively cheap, and especially for something you're just going to paint again, find some cheap paint. And finally, number three, designing with your kids. This is going to be their room or their playroom or their space. Include them in the decision making process. Talk with them, get their feedback, get their interests. Make sure by doing this and spending a little time, you're going to find out what interests them and what decorations and what you changes you can make that's going to align with their interests and just continue to go and snowball over time. So that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure that you like and subscribe, follow the podcast. That way, as new episodes are available, it'll automatically be downloaded to your podcast player of choice, or you're going to get a notification once it is available. If you have a question of the day that you would like me to answer, just make sure that you reach out to me here on Facebook, YouTube, or leave it in the comments on your podcast player that you're listening to. I greatly appreciate you spending some time with me. Hopefully this helps give you a starting point with creating those flexible spaces for your kids. Appreciate you tuning into the Hot List. Again, I'm your host, Matt Johnson with Keller Williams Realty. I do this because your experience matters and should be trusted with a veteran. Y'all have a phenomenal day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.